And now to today's program. Today marks exactly the third anniversary of Governor Barbara Roberts' inauguration, when she became Oregon's first woman governor. During the past 3 years, her staff reports, Governor Roberts has been heard to refer more than once to the old Chinese curse, "May you live in interesting times." She might well add, "Give me a break." Interesting hardly begins to describe those eventful 3 years. Just consider her place of business, the state capitol. There's been a fire in the capitol. Rodents have been found running around in the inner parts of the capitol, and the building was struck by an earthquake strong enough to cause our gold-painted pioneer atop the dome to dance at least 1/8 of an inch across the roof. And all that catastrophe before even mentioning that 2 general sessions of the legislature have convened and adjourned in the building during her tenure. The last 3 years have seen the deepening effect of Ballot Measure 5 on schools and state government, a continuing debate on gay rights, growth of in-migration from California, and further shifts in the state economy from traditional industries to new ones, just to cite a few of the tough issues. Governor Roberts, in her preview of her remarks today, sums up her position best. There have been times in Oregon's history when all that was demanded of a governor was to stay the course, to be a careful steward managing state government. This is not one of those times. It's a great pleasure to have Governor Roberts with us today to look at where we are now in Oregon and where we're headed. She will discuss her goals for Oregon in the future, the new directions she's setting for Oregon. Please join me in welcoming back to the City Club podium Governor Barbara Roberts.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. That is clearly more fun than a legislative session. Well, as Don told you, on January the 14th, 1991, exactly 3 years ago today, I took the oath of office as your governor. Today, I begin the 4th year of my first term, certainly wiser and with a very first-hand appreciation for the word challenges. And I know clearly that Oregonians, like most Americans, don't exactly greet the work of politicians with deep and everlasting gratitude. But if it were easy, everybody would do it. After 3 years, I have no illusions about this job. In these times of economic change and social transition and growth, it is, in fact, a 24-hour-a-day job. It takes a backbone of steel, a very thick skin, and a very steady compass. It takes standing up and speaking out and pushing forward to influence the public debate. And it means delivering reality. And this is the reality. My commitment to Oregon hasn't changed. I believe in government and the positive power we have to make a difference in the lives of Oregonians. In the last 3 years, we have added more than 150,000 jobs to Oregon's economy. We have streamlined state government, cutting the number of state jobs for the first time in over a decade. We have helped more than 16,000 Oregonians move off welfare and into jobs. We have added 13,000 new units of affordable housing. We have won a federal waiver for the Oregon Health Plan, and in 10 days, the first 120,000 Oregonians will have access to a doctor when they are sick. And we have stopped one statewide anti-gay initiative, and we will stop another. Being governor and being part of those and other successes is exciting and rewarding. And it's what's kept me going and working for Oregon's future during these 3 years. As governor, I helped chart Oregon's direction, the course we're going to take into the future. And right now, our state and our government are at a crossroads. We will have no new money in the next budget, and we will confront a new $1 billion shortfall. The challenges Oregon faces call out for change and innovation, for flexibility and creativity. And as we redefine the role of our 135-year-old state government, we are heading through a pretty rocky transition. I believe government can and must become more efficient, and our streamlining has already saved millions of dollars. But just cutting the waste from our governments and schools, while that is essential, won't make up that difference. This is about more than just pinching pennies and cutting administrative costs and trying to continue the same programs and services in the same old way. It's about celebrating and investing in what works, while at the very same time having the courage to admit that many services and the systems that provide them are not working. They don't produce the results we want as citizens. Reality is that we must make fundamental changes in many of our systems, in education and human services and public safety and natural resources. A couple of weeks ago, I sat down to begin drafting this speech. It was in the beginning a pretty conventional speech, a speech about the challenges Oregon faces, about crime and jobs and education and government efficiency. That sound familiar? I was busy choosing for that speech my own personal antidotes, the favorite ones, and listing all of my accomplishments and preparing to deliver to you my to-do list. But that just didn't work. I wanted to say something more, to find a way to talk with you about the size of our challenge, to express the mixture of urgency and hope that I feel. Let me try by telling you about a recent Saturday night and a house in Portland. From the outside, it could have been any house on any street, anywhere in Oregon. The story was on the inside. It was well after midnight, and I was with the Portland police. As I stepped through the back door of the house, I immediately noticed the stench. An old woman sat in a kitchen chair, a tank feeding oxygen to her lungs. The kitchen, her kitchen, was strewn with clothes and garbage, and the walls were covered with graffiti. With her sat a young woman, more of a girl really, about 15 years old, and with her a baby, maybe 6 months old. The baby's eyes barely registered a flicker as we entered the room. Another girl, about 13, came in. The two girls had been hired by the old woman and moved in to help her as her health failed. But they weren't the only ones who moved in. Roving gangs take advantage of the vulnerable, the weak, those who can't put up a fight. And they had taken over this house. The gang members come and go at will, trashing the place, crashing on mattresses in the filthy upstairs bedrooms, dealing drugs, and slamming those two girls around. The girls in that house treated our arrival, between constant telephone calls at that time of night, with apathy, as if it were absolutely nothing unusual. And that is how they live. On our way out the front door, we passed through a dark living room lit only by a blaring television set. And in that room there, on a hospital bed, was another elderly person. I couldn't tell by looking if the person was a man or a woman. I could barely tell if they were alive. There in that house lie the challenges that cannot go unmet. Now, I have long known, as most of you have known, that Oregon has a serious and growing gang problem, but that is just part of the problem. Gang activity is like an opportunistic infection, preying on the weak and vulnerable, destroying those lives that already have the least hope and have the least opportunity. But we failed that elderly couple and those two girls long before gangs invaded their home. And we are failing that young baby today. They have none of the basic necessities of life: jobs, education, health, and safety. We must in this state create an economy that allows all Oregonians to find jobs. We must find a way to strengthen families. Our schools must reach out to all of our children, preparing them for jobs and not for the streets. We must work to end the cycle of teen pregnancy and generational poverty. We must allow our seniors to live their lives with the care and the dignity that they deserve. And we must protect our citizens and our communities from the ravages of crime and violence. Some of you right now may believe that our schools and our governments cannot meet those challenges, that unless we raise taxes, we will simply not have the money to get the job done. I've been there. I know how you feel. But now and for the foreseeable future, that's not the answer. We need to spend the money we have differently, and we need to plan for a future with the money we have. That is the state of the state. That is reality. But there's more to that reality. Oregon's economy is growing. Our productivity is going up. New companies are moving to Oregon, and we are diversifying our economy as never before in the state's history. In the past 3 years alone, 181 businesses have either moved to Oregon or made major expansions in their Oregon operations. Oregon's projected employment growth is 75% faster than the rest of this nation. And we've created, as I said, 150,000 new jobs. So our economy is healthy, and our personal income is increasing. What's changed is that Oregonians are willing to turn over less of that personal income to government. In 1990, state and local government taxes took 11% out of Oregonians' incomes. It now takes about 10%. But that doesn't mean, because taxpayers have a little bit more in their pocket, that they are feeling flush or that they feel more secure in their personal finances. Oregon's economy is producing more jobs and greater personal income than ever before, but it is also creating more uncertainty. For example, in 1993, 380,000 Oregonians who wanted to work were unemployed for at least part of that year. The economy is volatile and it demands constant adjustment. The jobs are there, but they are not there for life. Like workers all over the world today, our jobs are less secure than they were, so we have to learn to save more. Our jobs are more challenging than they were, so we need to invest more in education and training. Those facts, those realities mean that government and schools are going to play a different role in our state and in our future. We are turning a corner. And as we turn that corner and chart a new direction for Oregon, I have a clarity of purpose, a clarity built by my belief in Oregonians, the urgency of the challenge before us, and the opportunity that I believe is at our fingertips. My 1995-97 budget will be dedicated to long-term results. I won't play around the margins of change, tinkering with small investments in Oregon's future. We must now hold ourselves accountable for laying the foundation for the future of this state. My budget decisions will be based on the measurable differences that programs will make for Oregon 6 and 8 and 10 years from now. I will challenge all the old assumptions. I will not simply prioritize the same old services the same old way, sorting them into a list, one saying the ones we keep and the other list saying the ones we eliminate. Instead, I am challenging government to rethink the way we build a community, the ways we support our family and children, how we protect the quality of life, that we all cherish so much. Think of that baby girl I met Saturday night. She and far too many babies are at risk from the day that they are born in our state. In 1992, more than 5,000 women aged 15 to 19 gave birth in Oregon. 70% of those new mothers were unmarried. We know that often those involved in drug and alcohol are those teen mothers, that those teen mothers are often involved in delinquency, and they're getting lousy grades for the most part in school if they show up at all. The cost of failing to curb teen pregnancy is high. Low-weight babies more likely to be ill, more delinquency and crime, more school dropouts, and more families that can't support themselves. And nearly half of teenage moms end up on welfare. We can save nearly $30,000 in future medical, welfare, and public assistance costs each and every time we avoid an unwanted teen pregnancy. Cutting teen pregnancy in half in this state would save hundreds of millions of dollars over the next decade. We pay very dearly for long-term for our inattention and for our unwillingness to solve problems early. And we must take our heads out of the sand on this issue. We need a crusade. And the crusade will be led out of my office. I will appoint a special assistant to the governor to combat unwanted teen pregnancy. That assistant will report directly to me, county by county, month by month, about how we can expand the programs that we know are working and improve or eliminate the ones that don't do any good. I'm going to enlist the support of business leaders and school teachers, churches, community activists, and parents to work with me and with the advocate to reach kids across this state. I've seen, as many of you have, what can be done by the I Have a Dream Foundation and the Oregon Leadership Institute, building self-esteem and self-determination in the young people of the state and working in partnership with families and schools and government and business. Those are great models. In my next budget, I will double the number of school-based health centers. We will serve more kids, and we will leverage our efforts with national foundation funds like the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that just gave a major grant here in Oregon. And we must stop permitting our elderly to live in fear, afraid to sit on their own porch, afraid to walk to the store, prisoners in their very own homes. And though our goals are clearly to provide jobs and a quality education and to help families keep their kids out of crime, we cannot do it at the expense of law enforcement or corrections and still guarantee safety for the elderly of this state. We must keep in mind today's realities. The number of kids committing crimes is skyrocketing. We respond too late with no certainty of penalty and no accountability for behavior. And that failure to demand responsibility is turning our kids into criminals and our communities and our schools into war zones. The statistics are telling. 9 out of 10 juveniles now in custody are committed there for felonies. 1/3 are committed for sex offenses. Over the last 5 years, the number of homicide-related offenders in the juvenile system has grown 800%. Yesterday, I signed an executive order creating a 9-member governor's task force on juvenile justice. With Attorney General Ted Kulongoski as its chair, the task force is going to scrutinize the juvenile justice system and propose ways to reduce juvenile crime and violence in Oregon. I look forward to their action plan, but I want to tell you, the Attorney General and I know one thing already. We need more beds. This is sad to say. We need more beds to lock up violent juvenile offenders. My 95-97 budget will include new beds for those juvenile offenders using existing state facilities. I've asked the Director of Human Resources and the Director of Corrections, in cooperation with the Attorney General, to view and review facility options around the state, and to make recommendations to me by April 1. But beds are not enough. We need more police on the streets. Without strong police presence, our efforts to stop kids from joining gangs and from violence will not give us the backup that we need. So while the Attorney General is reviewing the juvenile justice system, I have directed the Superintendent of State Police to prepare a strategic plan to expand community policing through partnerships between state and local law enforcement agencies. We are doing it now. We need to expand it and move forward. We have in this state stabilized adult crime, and we've brought down the recidivism rates in our adult prison system. We've worked at doing it, and we've done it. We must do the same with the juvenile system, or crime will eat up our state budget in the very near future. And as I think about our kids and their needs, what really offends me most is the amount of money that is wasted in paperwork, not in programs. I don't have to tell you, you all know that government is tangled with lots of rules and regulations, and believe me, the federal government is the worst offender. I would like to give you just one example, the Children's Services Division. CSD, as you know, is the state agency most responsible for making sure that we stop child abuse and protect our kids. It is absolutely critical work. But the division estimates that 400 of its 2,000 employees spend their time reporting to the feds about our compliance with federal regulations. This is a horrible waste of time and resources. And even more important, the rules and regulations are often short-sighted and prevent our frontline caseworkers from serving children and families. Throughout state government, hundreds, maybe thousands of workers spend their time jumping through federal hoops. Now, I know that the feds send us money, and I know that they just want to make sure that the job is done right. But there is a better way, and Oregon is taking the lead. We have asked Washington, D.C. to let us deliver results and not paperwork. We agree that we will be accountable for producing results using our Oregon benchmarks as a guide if they will agree to relax the mindless rules and regulations. We can save money and we can do more for Oregon and Oregonians. The Clinton administration recognizes Oregon as the leading state in this nation in setting benchmarks and measuring the performance of our state programs, and they are very interested in the proposal we have brought to them. I believe we have a good chance to be a pilot in the better way of doing business, where Oregon can be a model for a new federal-state relationship across this country. Those same principles, results, not regulations, should apply to the state's relationship with local governments. Rather than governing by edict, we need to govern through shared vision and mutual respect. We are seeing it now across program areas in economic development, in children's programs, workforce, and education. By giving the front lines ownership and accountability, we can do a better job for Oregonians. I have already asked state agencies to identify the bureaucratic roadblocks that stop them from delivering services effectively and efficiently. And today, I am asking local governments to identify the roadblocks that the state has thrown in their way, blocking their ability to produce results. We must deliver services differently, and we must deliver different services. And as we measure toward a new and different future, we must not use an old-fashioned ruler to test our progress. We must measure to outcomes, to results, to benchmarks, with tools calibrated against our very highest standards and our dreams. We can afford a dream of good education for every Oregon child and a job for every adult. We can afford our dreams of streets and schools free of crime. We can afford our dreams of self-sufficiency for homeless families and for welfare mothers. We can afford our dreams of providing health care and dignity from birth to old age. But we can only afford those dreams if we are truly ready to rethink our response to every single challenge. An ivy-covered building does not guarantee a good education. A prison cell does not guarantee a safe community. We must rethink. So as we turn the corner in Oregon, it is not a time for the status quo. We're not even talking anymore about doing more with less. We are talking about doing better with less. We're not only talking about reinventing government, but reinventing the way that all of us think about government. We can stay in this place, hobbled by the past, by fear, and by unwillingness to change, or we can stand up, plant our feet firmly on the path of innovation and change, and march into a positive and absolutely realistic future for the state of Oregon. As for me, I choose the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor Roberts. Now it's time for questions from City Club members. You'll note that there are 2 microphones in the center of the room. Please use those. I will be rotating from one to the other, back and forth in the use of the microphones, and I'll help with a cue from the table. Please make your questions brief. Get to the question mark part of it as quickly as possible so everybody has an opportunity to visit with Governor Roberts. Our first question, as I mentioned earlier, is from Marge Kafori, member of the Board of Governors.
Thank you, Don. Governor, in the last 2 years, your efforts seem to have been focused on streamlining state government and making it more efficient. But many people don't believe state government is really any different than when you started, and that the changes that you have imposed are really just window dressing and moving boxes around. Could you please respond to that?
Thank you, Marge. Not only can I, I'm delighted to have an opportunity to. Let me say, first of all, that in January of 1992, when I addressed the state in my State of the State that year, I told people we were going to make government more efficiency. And in the process that followed between those 2 legislative sessions, we saved over $200 million and cut positions. When we then entered the 93-95 budget process, we really kept from doubling the cuts in state agency budgets because of what we had done in the interim. In the last 2 years, we've cut 2,300 state positions. Gone, not in the budget, and the dollars that funded them, and the process of their carrying forward every year is not there, so millions more dollars are saved. We've eliminated over 50 boards and commissions that we have no further use for in Oregon. We've consolidated, we've got smarter, and one of the things that's really interesting, when people tell you about administration and how frustrated they are with that issue, when I became governor, there was 1 manager for every 3 employees in state government. We were indeed overmanaged. We have now moved to 1 in 6, and we are headed to 1 in 9. Those are the kind of goals that mean that the dollars are there, saved in ways that are smart, so that we can expend them on programs for things that are essential. Now, it's always easy for a governor or a mayor or a county commissioner to tell you what a good job they've done in bringing efficiency to your government because you like to hear that. But it's hard to believe because it's hard to see. Let me give you, and some of you've heard this, but I want to say it again because I think it's important. Financial World magazine is the oldest financial magazine in this country. And once a year, it evaluates every state in this nation in terms of the efficiency and how they manage dollars and government programs and the accountability and results. When I became governor, we were number 37. We are now number 7. I believe we are doing it right. It is not done. It is an ongoing process, but we've taken a 135-year-old government and we've made it something that can move us into the next century, and we're going to keep right on doing it till the job is done.
I think our next question was from Don Leaf. Is he here? If not, feel free to use the microphone.
My name is Peter Heuser. I'm a City Club member. Thank you for coming to speak to us today. I know that one of the criticisms I've heard of you is that you had difficulty recognizing that, unfortunately, Oregonians do want to spend less on government than they had in the past. From what I hear, the principal issue Oregonians are concerned about now is the possible devastation of the schools due to Measure 5. And yet in your address, you just touch upon education very briefly. What do you plan to do to prevent the devastation of our schools in this climate that we have where you have to spend less money?
Well, like local government and state government, schools will be spending less money, and I think we need to be clear about that. The focus that I just talked about and how we spend and how we fund differently and make decisions differently applies to every level of government, including schools. The money that we're working to save right now, the $200 million that we're taking out of this interim budget in terms of savings, that $50 million of that is general fund, and I have dedicated that money in my budgeting process to schools and to programs for kids. That's the beginning. That's one of the ways we do it. We have also in this state moved to begin to focus new ways of doing education. Interestingly enough, we say education, we often mean K through 12 because that's the piece most of us feel most concerned about, because those kids, if we want them to be productive adults, have to start out with a good K through 12 system, and that's essential. But one of the things we've tried to do in Oregon is look at what we call a seamless education system. And the Workforce Quality Council that I started in 1991 is looking at every place we educate and train people in this state. K through 12, community colleges, higher ed, welfare reform, whatever it is. And I dedicated large amounts of money, about $108 million in the last lottery budget, to focusing on some of those issues to move us forward, not only on educational reform, but on preparing our kids to do better in school. Programs like Head Start, other issues where we send a kid to school and they're ready to learn when they arrive. There is no question when we cut $1 billion out of the next state budget, every part of the state budget will be affected. And when you think about 90% of our budget is either in education, human resources, or public safety, I think it's clear that there will be some changes in that budgeting process. But my priority is to make certain we send those kids into the future prepared, educated, drug-free, and crime-free. And part of that means that we have to have a focus on public education. We'll do it better and smarter, and we'll ask every school district in the state to do it. But the focus must be on our future, and that obviously means our children.
I'm Don Sterling, a member. Have you or the police or anybody else been able to help those folks in that house you described that was invaded by gangs?
Well, that's why I was there. I want to be cautious how I answer this because some of this was in confidence, and I want to be cautious. We clearly had a situation in which everybody in the house needed help from a number of aspects. The person in that bed in the living room clearly was someone who needed professional health care and professional help. So as we looked at that issue, you know, where are the visiting nurses? Why can't we get rid of the gangs? Why aren't those kids in school? What's happening to that baby? All of those questions, we not only looked at it from the perspective that I described it to you today, but obviously that individual house. I think you would be shocked to learn how many houses like that exist right here in your community, and how many young people like those two girls and that baby exist right here in your community. We sit here in this lovely room with lovely lunches, cleanliness, safety, plans for the weekend. Their plans for the weekend is to survive. And every single thing we do, that household and every other one, has to be focused on how we change what's happening. If you think about those gang kids as criminals, think of them too as victims. They have now become the perpetrators. They were, in many cases, originally the victims. We can't, in the process of dealing with these issues, forget the importance of prevention in this state. If we had spent more money on prevention, which many of us pushed and pushed and pushed 10 years ago and 5 years ago, maybe some of the issues of homelessness and poverty and teen pregnancy and other things that nobody wanted to look at would look differently today. So in that house, we are literally checking to see what we can do to help. That's why I was there. But that is only one of hundreds and hundreds of houses in Oregon who need our help.
Robert Bailey, a member of the City Club. Governor Roberts, I also want to add my admiration for all of your efforts and thanks. But and like all Oregonians, I'm deeply concerned about the rising juvenile crime and the problems in the state. What I'm a little concerned about is the emphasis that we continue to put on our prisons and our crime detection and punishment aspects of it. And picking up on what you're just talking about, the prevention aspects, I'm wondering if you have given any thought to the many organizations in this state that are really dedicated to the development of the human spirit and the maturing of young people's attitudes about themselves and about the world around them. And I'm talking, of course, about all of the arts organizations who really are constantly engaged in this process. And yet, we are never asked or very seldom involved in any major part of this turnaround of what I consider a terribly broken spirit of the young people. So let me ask you very directly. We talk about quality of life with a lot of glibness, but where do the arts fit into any kind of a program that really is going to address these children's spirits? Thank you.
Let me see if I can address that in two ways for you. First of all, I believe very strongly in the arts. And while I was cutting budgets all over state government, we kept $1 million in the budget for the Oregon Arts Commission. And we did something that people kind of flinched at when I first brought it forward, but I think they're now deciding it was a good idea. We moved the Oregon Arts Commission into the Economic Development Department because arts are also about the economy. They're about our spirit, they're about our culture, and they are also a financial asset in this state. One of the things I did was to make sure we didn't forget that. And last night I had a meeting with all of the areas of Economic Development Department, all of the partners, I guess I would describe them in economic development, and the arts community and the Arts Commission were there because I believe they are important to the future of this state. Let me say about the spirit, however we describe that, the soul of people, the spirit, whatever it is that makes us who we are. I have watched some very interesting things happen with the arts recently and kids in trouble. You may remember the art show, the photography show that was opened at the Oregon Art Museum a few months ago, where professional photographers took gang members and kids in trouble and worked with them with a camera to bring those two pieces together so they could learn to deal with their feelings through a camera rather than a gun. Right now there was a program with some gang kids that are dealing with making a video film, teaching kids to find other ways to deal with the anger and the frustration and the poverty of their lives. So I do believe that the arts play a role in who we are and in the gentleness and expression that we learn through the arts that many times will turn young people away from crime and away from violence and away from the anger they feel. And I think it's a critical part of this culture. It will be harder and harder to fund those programs, but I can't think that we in this community will ever let that knowledge escape us. And I would say one more thing to you. Don't wait to be asked. The problem is there. Go find a way to help. Sometimes you don't get asked, and you just have to step forward. I Have a Dream Foundation was not something people were asked to do. The people who started that step forward because the need was there. I would ask the arts community to look at more ways to make that happen.
Robert Liberty, City Club member. Governor, thank you for joining us today. I want to return to a theme that was very prominent in your campaign 4 years ago and was announced as one of the pillars of your administration. That's growth management. Many people in this region regard a decision on whether or not to build the Western Bypass, a $250 million highway outside the urban growth boundary, as decisive in determining whether we follow in the path of Seattle and become another auto-dependent and highly congested sprawling metropolis, or we take a different route. This last session, the legislature declined to provide an increment to the gas tax, and now the Transportation Commission is considering which projects to eliminate. Would you be willing as governor now to exercise your leadership and direct them to terminate any further consideration of the Western bypass?
Let me say, and I think most of you know this, that we have a study underway at the request of those communities in Washington County to look at all the options available on that issue. There is no question about the congestion in Washington County. It is awful. And believe me, during the transportation of the light rail, it is going to get, during the construction, it is going to get worse. But we have problems on side streets, we have problems on freeways, we have problems on every aspect of transportation in Washington County. I believe strongly that we have demonstrated in Oregon in the past, when we stopped the Mount Hood Freeway, that there are times to stop construction of something that is not to the advantage of the community long term. This is the 6, 8, 10, 20-year decision making rather than the short term. I am waiting very anxiously now for that option study to come back. I don't want to predetermine the information from the study, but my leaning is always that the better alternative tends to be alternative means of transportation that does not depend on concrete to get us there. Side streets, alternative options. That's the reason in the last session, in addition to the funding for the ongoing construction of the West Side Light Rail, I brought to the legislature and successfully passed the planning dollars for the Clackamas Light Rail. We don't have to wait till one gets done to start the next one, and also the money that we got in the last budget that I brought forward on the high-speed rail between British Columbia and Eugene. I think we need to look for those kind of alternatives, and I am waiting anxiously the answers now to these options so that we can look at a way to make a good choice for Washington County and not just a quick choice for Washington County.
Ray Palani, Governor Roberts.
I just answered your question, Ray.
I'm afraid you didn't. I'm afraid you didn't because you didn't talk about funding. And so may I ask you, what are your plans for state funding of alternative transportation? As you know, the money is locked in the Constitution for highways only. It's time that the people were able to vote on it. Are you prepared to make that your priority?
Well, Ray, I think you know my position is that I believe that the gas tax and other constitutionally dedicated funds should be able to deal with moving people, product, and produce regardless of whether we're moving them in a car, a truck, by rail, by bike, by water, whatever it is. That has always been my position. It continues to be. We haven't done very well at the ballot on that issue in the past, and we have not done very well in the legislature on that issue in the past. That doesn't mean that the issue is not correct. So I continue to feel strongly that we can move forward on that issue if we can find a way to get that discussion into a different kind of discussion than we have had in the last few campaigns on the issue. And I think as we look at that issue, we need to push the federal government just as hard to make the kinds of decisions at the federal government that give us some freedom of choice on how we use transportation dollars out of the trust fund in Washington, D.C., including the trust fund dealing with gasoline taxes for airplanes. That gas tax for air fuel, a lot of you don't know there is a trust fund sitting back there, and we would like to have them open it up to give us some alternatives for air transit in some of our smaller communities, particularly east of the mountains. So it is a time for creativity and options that are done based on the need of a state or a community, and I think we need to stop putting roadblocks again in the way of good choices for the future.
Well, it's the state that's the problem, not the federal government. We have flexibility at the federal government level, but not at the state level.
But I'm not your problem, Ray.
Yes, you are, because you're not pushing.
I'm not your problem.
Letting the people vote.
Yeah.
John McDonald O'Leary, City Club member, Governor Roberts. You mentioned in your remarks of the involvement of the people on the front line. I was hoping you could give us some specific examples of how state employees, consumers of state services, and even interested citizens are involved in these decisions you talked about in your speech.
Let me just give you a couple of quick examples. There are lots of them, but this one I'm particularly fond of. I met a few weeks ago with managers and line employees in one of our human resources departments. The management had asked of the employees, what would you do if you were running these agencies? How would you bring those efficiencies? What are we doing that we don't need to do anymore? Those employees brought forward dozens and dozens of ideas. Let me tell you just one of them. It is so simple, it makes you wonder. We have a computerized system because we are in the modern age, right? In that agency, a huge human resources agency, everything was on the computer. It was updated literally by the hour, every new piece of information, and every time they updated it, they ran a hard copy. And somebody filed it. They are not filing those hard copies. They are not making those hard copies anymore, and we saved literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in the next biennium and this biennium by doing that. We want people to tell us what's not working. I don't care whether it's a citizen who's dealing with an agency, whether it's an employee, a manager, another elected official from another level of government. We need those ideas, and what it means is as we rethink how we do things, we've got to see what things we're doing that are quite frankly stupid. That was stupid, and these employees all knew it. But a manager in the head of that department might not even give it a second thought. That's the kind of input that makes the difference in turning around how we do government.
Chuck Williams, member. Governor, I've voted for you. I've donated some money to your campaign.
Thank you.
It wasn't that much.
We'll work on that.
Not this month.
Hold your wallet.
All right. Governor, I have one concern that I'd like you to address a little bit. Particularly in the last legislative session, it just seemed like on many issues you were going in one direction, many of which I support and agree with, and the legislative leadership was going in another. It felt to me and to many that the communication was not there, that the leadership was just not getting accomplished, that you were not able to get the what you wanted from your legislature this year. Can you give us some assurances, some maybe specific examples of particular things that you could reassure us that if reelected in the next biennium, that we'll see something better out of Salem?
Well, let me say, first of all, I have sometimes described recently the last legislative session as the longest dental appointment in history. But it was a hard session for everybody. People were going in every direction. They didn't want to face the realities. Let me describe my role in that legislature in two different ways to you. One, let me tell you that in spite of the $1 billion, really turned out to be about $780 million in cuts, in spite of those cuts, and in spite of all the hard decisions and all the controversies of that session, we got a very, very strong agenda through that legislature out of the governor's office in transportation, in managed growth, in human resources, in correction reform. Very, very strong agenda that I'm very proud of. That happened because I know how to work with the legislature. That happened because every single week we went with the Democrats and the Republicans, with both houses, with the leadership, with the Ways and Means leadership, constantly. Some of the concerns you hear from people who were not part of that leadership and they were a little irritated they weren't in the decision-making role. Everybody can't be a leader in the legislature. But let me say additionally, in spite of the very strong program we got through this legislature and how positive I feel about that in spite of the negative session that people feel it was, there is another way to look at this process. If I had moved where the legislature was and had not led the way I needed to, which was sometimes confrontive, we would have made some very bad decisions. Let me give you an example of some decisions that came through the legislature that I opposed, so you'll know the difference in our priorities. I believe that covered bridges are very nice. I like them. My mom and dad courted in one. But they are not an obligation of state government when we are cutting mental health funds. I love county fairs. I campaign in them. I work them. I love them. I love the produce and the quilts. But they are not a state government obligation, or should not be in my estimation. But we funded them in the last session because the legislature was unwilling to say no to their communities. Those kinds of choices I could not support, and in order to support them, I had to come into agreement on something that I felt was absolutely a wrong sense of priority. So we disagreed on some very important things or some important priorities. But the big pushes in the legislature, even when we disagreed, the health care funding, obviously the employer mandate is part of that. We fought in the governor's office tooth and nail, and in the end we won. We didn't win it all, but we won all the big pieces. The same thing was true on land use. I made clear that I would veto bad land use legislation that destroyed that system for the state. And as a result of that and negotiations that were tough and painful, we got the secondary lands bill through and we preserved land use for the state's future. I think the thing that is most difficult about examining that session is to understand what we were working to do, the agenda we brought forward, and being able to do that, and an agenda that we weren't going to let happen because I believed it was the wrong priority set for Oregon. And I think if you could look at that, I mean, the legislature, there were large numbers of members in the legislature who wanted to eliminate the Economic Development Department. I mean, we talked about the 150,000 new jobs and the new businesses. They didn't happen by accident. That Economic Development Department leads the way on that. So the legislature and I will continue to disagree when those are the kinds of choices that are before us, and I will continue to be able to move strong agendas through that legislature because I know the system and I know what it takes to help people understand the importance of the agenda I brought to that session.
Governor Roberts, Avell Gordley, City Club member, having served in that last session, I really appreciate your previous response. I had to get up because, you know, we can't let all the men ask all the questions.
Thank you, Avell.
I want to ask you a question that several people have asked me, what was your thinking for your State of the State address, and not Salem or Baker City or Medford or some other place in the state?
Thank you. That's a good question. I got asked that on a radio show in Salem yesterday, then they were a little irritated, I guess. I have done the last 3 major addresses I gave in terms of the state of this state in Salem. I think it's important to be able to move these messages to different and new audiences all the time. In order to really have done what we traditionally do, which is to bring all the legislature into the building and fill up the galleries and do all those things, I wasn't sure what was the most productive use of their time or mine, and this was an opportunity to hit a very large audience, all of the cable television here, and a group of leadership in another part of the state who cares about the state of the state. As the next few months goes on, I will be delivering variables of this State of the State address in every county in the state. I think the citizens of the state need to know where we are, need to know where we're headed, and need to know what it's going to take to get there. And let me say, while Avell Gordley is standing here, Representative Gordley, that when I make comments about the legislature, there are some members of the legislature who are not included in those remarks. And she is one of them. And I want to say to you, send me more Avell Gordleys and we will solve the problem.
I'm Mary McCarthy, City Club member. You recently announced, Governor Roberts, that you were going to close Damage State Hospital. And you recently, in your speech, mentioned mental illness and the fact that budgets were being cut for that. You announced the closing because of your concern about the safety of the patients. And I have several questions.
Okay.
Where will these mentally ill patients go when Damage closes? And how will the new facilities be funded in light of all of the budget cut things that you've talked about? And how can these future facilities handle the safety concerns better than Damage?
Good questions, hard questions. Let me see if I can do that for you. I think the first thing I would tell you about the Damage program, I believe it is a program and not a facility. The facility is a bad mental health facility. If it were being built today, it would never, never, never be built the way it is. It is a bad facility for doing mental health care. Secondly, when the legislature and this governor began the process of downsizing Damage, it was because the facility was not the right facility. And we began a process of not only building a community network to help those patients who needed mental health support and care, but looking at more and more alternative ways to serve those mentally ill Oregonians appropriately. When I announced, after the difficulties at Damage, that we were looking at beginning to move more of those patients out of that facility, we began looking for all of the alternatives for appropriate placement. Appropriate placement means you look at the mental health problems and needs of the patient and you place them accordingly. Some of those patients are going to facilities in Eastern Oregon. Some of those patients will be going back into communities with additional support, which is not only less expensive but less confining and more useful for them. Some of those patients are going to the Veterans Hospital or may go to the Veterans Hospital. Others of them who really, the problem is now at this stage of their life more that they are a nursing home patient with those kinds of needs rather than just a mental health patient. So we are looking individually at every one of those patients. We are not going to turn people out of that facility into a place that they are not more safe and better cared for. The staff in that hospital is trying very hard under terribly adverse circumstances. The patients who are there are more ill and in greater need than patients who were in those facilities a few years ago, and they remain in an inappropriate facility. I am awaiting a report that's going to come back to me, a review that's been going on a day-by-day basis at Damage that will come back to me about options that we will have next week. And I am looking forward to having a chance to look at those options and make the right choices. And I want to tell you, I think most of you know that my early involvement in the political arena came as a result of my own disabled son who is autistic. The last thing I want to happen ever in this state is that in order to save money, we cast people aside, particularly people who are vulnerable. We will do everything we can to make our patients less vulnerable and not more vulnerable.
We have time for one more question.
Great. Ty Pettit, City Club member, Governor. I wanted to ask a little bit more about economic development issues. I think the 150,000 jobs is a very comforting statistic, and that's probably $250 or $300 million worth of income tax revenue or more. I don't know what the absolute number is, but it seems to me that if we're going to not vote in new taxes, we're going to have to look for ways to grow the state's economy aggressively. And it seems to me a lot of the 150,000 jobs were in lower wage positions. How are we going to attract a mid-level and higher wage level positions into the state, and what do you plan to see over the next 4 years?
Well, let me tell you, I would not even begin to contend to you that all of those 150,000 new jobs are at $12.50 or $15.
Governor Roberts, I think that says that we appreciate you placing the reality squarely in our faces, laying out the challenges that we face, and sharing your dream for a better Oregon. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.